All right, we'll get started a little early. So this is a talk that I had the pleasure of both moderating and giving. After I finished up at Harvard Law School, I was an active duty Army JAG officer and served as the Law of War advisor to the commander of 5th Corps during the Kosovo campaign back in '99. And now I teach a course here at Chestnut Hill College on the Law of War. So I've always liked to apply modern legal concepts to the Harry Potter series. And so I asked my collaborator and cousin, Sara Hardman, to join me. Sara teaches in the philosophy of education at Teachers College in Columbia. So we're going to take you through the Battle of Hogwarts. We're going to compare it to the modern law of war. And then we're going to take a look at it, at the law of war as it existed at the time of the International Statute of Secrecy.
Great. As Peter mentioned, my name is Sara Hardman. I teach philosophy and education at Teachers College. I don't teach law of war as Peter does, but I do spend a lot of time thinking about the life of the student and the life of the teacher. And I think those things are really interesting to think about when it comes to the Battle of Hogwarts, and when it comes to the whole span of the Second Wizarding War, as we see spaced across, let's see if I can get to the next slide, spaced across kind of the final 3 books in the series, books 5, 6, and 7. And so during the Second Wizarding War, of course, Voldemort is coming to power slowly but surely over time. We see many battles take place during this time, many really heartbreaking battles, right? Some of the most heartbreaking battles of the book, where Sirius dies, where Dumbledore dies, where Dobby dies. And eventually, this culminates in the final battle of the series, which takes place in the final few chapters of the entire series. And this is the Battle of Hogwarts. And so what I'm going to do in these next few slides is just talk through the context of this battle, talk through the role that the students and teachers played in the battle, and then Peter is going to talk about that context as it relates to the law of war. So this battle is taking place at Hogwarts, right? Voldemort is there. By some estimates, about 370 Death Eaters are there. There are giants, there are big spiders, and they're attacking the school, right? That's very notable. They're attacking the school, and they're attacking the students and the teachers there, right? Now, one interesting thing to take note of is the fact that when this first starts, there is some effort to kind of protect some of the students at Hogwarts, right? There's an evacuation that they talk about kind of repeatedly throughout these chapters. They're repeatedly touching upon underage wizards and evacuating the underage wizards to protect them. Of course, underage wizard means those wizards who are younger than 17 years old. So it's basically like the 6th years and under, some of the 7th years as well. But we see, for example, McGonagall, she's mentioning this evacuation plan, and in the second paragraph here it says, "Many of the students looked petrified. However, as Harry skirted the walls, scanning the Gryffindor table for Ron and Hermione, Ernie Macmillan stood up at the Hufflepuff table and shouted, 'And what if we want to stay and fight?' There was a smattering of applause. 'If you are of age, you may stay,' said Professor McGonagall." So again, there's some kind of recruitment of certain students and also an evacuation of other students as well. We also see that with Ginny. The Weasley family is there. Ginny is really adamant that she wants to fight. She's part of Dumbledore's army, and she gets into this argument with her mom. Her mom is saying she's 16, she's not old enough. Mrs. Weasley's like, the boys, they're okay to fight, but not Ginny. And Bill says gently, "Mom's right. You can't do this. Everyone underage will have to leave. It's only right." Now, I'll come back to this example in a little bit, because Ginny, of course, doesn't leave the battle. And just one more example of this. So it's back to that scene a moment ago with McGonagall. They're evacuating the Great Hall. All of the tables are either evacuating or some students are choosing to stay. And it says here, slowly the 4 tables emptied. The Slytherin table was completely deserted, but a number of older Ravenclaws remained seated while their fellows filed out. Even more Hufflepuffs stayed behind, and half of them remained in their seats, necessitating Professor McGonagall's descent from the teacher's platform to chivvy the underage on their way. Absolutely not, Creevy, go, and you, Peakes. So again, just another example of these students volunteering to fight in an attempt to evacuate them. Of course, we know it is unsuccessful here as well, as Colin Creevy does sneak back in and unfortunately is killed in battle. So again, we see this attempt at evacuating, attempt at kind of keeping safe certain students at the school. Other students are made to fight or invited to fight. But at the same time, there is still many, many students who participate who are underage. A moment ago, I put up the quote about Ginny kind of being said, like, you can't stay here because you're underage. And a moment later, Lupin comes and says, you know what, Molly, why doesn't Ginny stay here? Then at least she'll be on the scene and know what's going on, but she won't be in the middle of the fighting. A little odd to be like, you know, she can stay, she won't fight, it'll be okay. And of course she does end up fighting, but there's an invitation to Ginny to remain at the scene. Colin Creevy sneaks back in, other members of Dumbledore's army who are underage sneak back in. And in addition, I found this really interesting passage on page 697 of the text. This is Harry kind of approaching Ginny during the Battle of Hogwarts. It's written, he stopped in his tracks. Ginny was crouching over a girl who was whispering for her mother. It's all right, Ginny was saying, it's okay. We're going to get you inside. But I want to go home, whispered the girl. I don't want to fight anymore. I know, said Ginny, and her voice broke. It's going to be all right. So this is a really heartbreaking passage. I mean, this is another thing that we've kind of realized and reading over this battle again and again. It's really heartbreaking and really brutal as well. And we see these instances of young children engaging in battle. And we also see some other children, perhaps not underage wizards, but still students, young students by all accounts, who are actively taking up their wands and fighting these Death Eaters really courageously by all extents and purposes. Some of these students include, well, here we have a passage where Harry's talking to George. He's saying, we're fighting. And in the second paragraph, we could see that the members of the Order of the Phoenix are joined by members of Dumbledore's army and Harry's old Quidditch team, all with their wands drawn, heading up to the main castle. So we have this depiction of these students, 17 and 18 years old, taking their wands and going up to fight, to participate in battle against these Death Eaters and Dementors and giants. We see Kingsley Shacklebolt kind of give a plan of how they're going to approach the battle in Hogwarts. He says, we've only got half an hour until midnight, so we need to act fast. A battle plan has been agreed between the teachers of Hogwarts and the Order of the Phoenix. Professors Flitwick, Sprout, and McGonagall are going to take groups of fighters up to the 3 highest towers, Ravenclaw, Astronomy, and Gryffindor, where they'll have a good overview, excellent positions from which to work spells. Meanwhile, Remus, he indicated, Lupin, Arthur, he pointed toward Mr. Weasley sitting at the Gryffindor table, and I will take groups into the grounds. So here we have a clear indication of a battle plan that also involves teachers, which Peter will touch upon briefly, as not being like designated soldiers by any means, but as being just teachers, as civilians in the school, but as taking on the role of these commanders in this battle. And we can assume that the groups that they're taking, these groups of fighters, comprise the students themselves. And I won't go into too much detail about these, but there are so many passages throughout these final chapters where we see specific instances of Death Eaters targeting and battling with students. So for example, we see Dean Thomas in a duel with Death Eaters. We of course see Fenrir Greyback and Lavender Brown dueling. In the books, it's kind of left undetermined how she fares in the battle. In the movie, they chose to show her as dying in this battle. In addition, there's more duels, more students running in every direction, some carrying or dragging their injured friends. There's Dementors who face off against Looney, Ernie, Seamus, Harry, Ron, and Hermione. Even Draco Malfoy is attacked by a Death Eater, right? They mistake him as not being one of their own, but he is attacked. Students of Hogwarts are implicated or involved in the explosion that Fred eventually dies in. And Bellatrix, of course, is fighting Hermione, Ginny, and Luna at one point, while Seamus and Hannah Abbott are attacked by Voldemort. In addition, there are other civilians that we see fighting as well, particularly kind of at the very end of the battle, where we see the families and friends of every Hogwarts student who had remained to fight kind of spilling out of the castle and joining the battle, along with the shopkeepers and homeowners of Hogsmeade. I find that to be an interesting detail. And also the house elves take up arms as well. So I'm going to just end my portion by quoting Voldemort. This is kind of when he's in front of Hogwarts. Harry is pretending to be dead, and he says to everyone there present, "The battle is won. You have lost half of your fighters. My Death Eaters outnumber you, and the boy who lived is finished. There must be no more war. Anybody who continues to resist, man, woman, or child, will be slaughtered, as will every member of their family. Come out of the castle now, kneel before me, and you shall be spared. Your parents and children, your brothers and sisters will live and be forgiven, and you will join me in the new world we shall build together." So now I'm going to pass it over to Peter, and he can talk through the law of war.
So the battle is over. But remember, this was a battle that took place in a school with students fighting and civilians fighting. So this is the current modern law of war. We call it, the modern term is the International Humanitarian Law. It developed over time as the law of war. And there are three major provisions that impact the Battle of Hogwarts. The first is the Fourth Geneva Convention of 1949. So we've heard of the Geneva Conventions. There was a series of Hague and Geneva Conventions kind of back and forth through the end of the 19th century, through the World Wars, but this is the last one, and so it's the one that's in place today after the Second World War. And there are four. Others have to do with prisoners of war, of sick and wounded soldiers on land and on sea, but there is one for the protection of civilians. And significantly, there was a protocol added to it in 1977, which clarified some of the issues, particularly around schools, that are relevant here. And then we have the current Hague Convention, which is the Hague Convention of 1954, and that really focuses on the property. So we're going to examine the Battle of Hogwarts through these modern concepts. All right, so under both the original Geneva Convention of 1949 and the first protocol, there's the importance of the principle of distinction, that is, distinction between military targets and civilian targets. So civilians cannot be targeted, civilian buildings cannot be targeted, and therefore the first protocol made it very clear, schools cannot be the target of attacks. So clearly, Voldemort and the Death Eaters have violated the modern law of war, right? They have focused on a school and attacked a school, something you can't do. There's lots of prohibitions against attacking schools. Russia, in the Russia-Ukraine war, has been noted their bombing of schools, and they've been criticized under the law of war. Similarly, there's been some issues with Israel and perhaps hitting some of the schools in some of the Palestinian camps. But clearly, Voldemort, being the evil person he is, has completely ignored the law of war. I mean, he has targeted this school. His Death Eaters, his soldiers, are battling with students, regardless of how old they are. If they're, it could be 25. They are students, they are civilians. The faculty member are civilians. They're not attacking the magic ministry, they're not attacking Aurors, but they're attacking students. And that is a gross violation, certainly of the modern law of war. And look, I don't ever like to let the Ministry of Magic off the hook either. Where are the professional soldiers, right? There's no mention of the Aurors, coming to the aid of Hogwarts. It almost seems like the ministry, I guess what? The ministry was under Voldemort then at that point anyway, sorry. Well, that goes all the more to show that the evil of the new order that Voldemort's putting together. All right, and then we go from the students and the faculty to the building itself. So this is the Hague Convention for the Protection of Cultural Property, and essentially it says, look, there are certain buildings, there are certain objects, there are certain things that are part of kind of all of our benefit, and those should not be destroyed in war. And I think Hogwarts fits that bill, right? Not only is it a school, but it's the home of some of the most sacred objects in the wizarding world, the most significant historical objects. And so the way the Hague Convention works is they created this shield, which I think actually would look quite at home at Hogwarts, and that's supposed to protect the building. It's supposed to be like the Red Cross. Obviously, it hasn't had the same impact on society. But again, Voldemort is violating this Hague Convention by attacking something, destroying parts of something that has such a significant cultural heritage. And again, I guess, the Ministry of Magic, under his control, is doing the same thing. Because this Hague Convention not only puts restrictions on those who are attacking, but those who are being attacked. Like, you have an obligation to hide these things safely away. So if there had been an operational Ministry of Magic to comply with this, they should have taken all the historical objects and put it down in, say, the Basilisk Cave, locked safely away. But they did not do that. The other issue here, and you hear a lot about collateral damage when it comes to the modern law of war, the principle of proportionality. And so look, while you cannot attack a school, while you cannot attack students, if there's a military target nearby and you legitimately hit that target and perhaps you break the windows of the school or students get injured and it's unavoidable, that is permissible under the modern law of war. But again, the damage to Hogwarts, the death of the students is completely out of proportion to, there is no legitimate military target to Hogwarts anyway. So certainly, Voldemort and the Death Eaters have violated these conventions. All right, so that's the modern law of war, right? And so it's easy to say, yeah, but don't forget, these people live like it's the 18th century, or the 17th century. They have funny money. They, have this weird education system that seems to end at grade 13. They have house elves. So let's not judge them against the modern law of war. Let's judge them at the law of war as it existed when they went into hiding, right? So we know that the International Statute of Wizarding Secrecy was passed in 1689, and it was officially established in 1692. So let's look at the law of war as it existed in the late 18th century. All right, so this is Hugo Grotius. My son inserted the wand into his hand. He did not have a wand, but he was a real person, and he wrote a famous book called On the Law of War and Peace in 1625. So this would have been the authoritative law of war text as it existed when the wizards went into hiding. But it put significant limitations of war. If anything, at the time, there was something called the limited war theory that was in vogue. And it was really in reaction to the 30 Years' War and the religious wars that happened before that. Before that, there was a concept of just war. And it had kind of been denuded by this time to just mean if you think your cause is just, anything you do in favor of that cause is just as well. And that worked okay for the Christian world when they were fighting the infidels in the Crusaders, and they, okay, our cause is just, whatever we do is fine. But then they started fighting amongst themselves, right? And the 30 Years' War was a religious war, largely, between various Christian sects. And so this reaction was, well, wait a second. Maybe we're all just. We're talking about pretty fine-tuned differences between different kinds of Protestantism. So Hugo Grotius said, all right, assume everyone's cause is just. What are the rules that should apply to war? Everyone's cause is just, so you can't say whatever we're going to do is just. You have to have rules. And so they really started putting limitations on war. We'll go to the next slide. There was a book called The Law of Nations, which admittedly came out a little bit after 1689, but it built on Grotius' work. And I mean, at the time, they even prohibited attacks on military headquarters, right? The idea was generals were protected. It was just the line soldiers on a battlefield, in a cornfield. That's who was subjected to war. Civilians were supposed to be completely protected. There was this idea that, look, civilians have nothing to do with war. They should be able to go live their lives. Just the princes send the people into battle in a cornfield, let them fight it out. Whoever wins, wins, but leave civilians alone, leave the military headquarters alone, leave the generals alone. And so I think that shows really the problems with the magical world, right? I mean, so not only are they violating the laws of war as it exists today, but really as it existed at the time they went into hiding, right? I mean, they knew about, again, maybe not his book, but they knew about Hugo Grotius, they knew about the concept of limited war, and yet, how do they fight their wars? By attacking students, by attacking schools, and they really don't have any concept of professional soldiers. I really think, so therefore I think that the wizarding world follows this retrograde version of the just war theory. The just war theory was started by St. Augustine in the 6th century, and the problem that he was trying to solve was, he said, look, Jesus was a pacifist, so if I'm a Christian, that means I'm a pacifist. And that's fine when Christianity is a small Jewish sect, but once we became the official religion of the Roman Empire, we got to do something. Like, we can't just let evil countries win. So he's like, how can a Christian nation have a war? So it was a series of rules. There are 6 rules of how you can declare a war. There are 3 rules about how to fight a war. And Thomas Aquinas really developed it in the 13th century. But like I said, really in the medieval times, they ignored all those rules. They just said, is our cause just? Then we can do what we want. And I think that's the law of war in the wizarding world, right? The Voldemort and the Death Eaters think what they're doing is just. Therefore, they can attack schools, and they can kill children and faculty members. I think the wizarding world is a pretty rough place. Every time I delve into their rules, I've talked about their total lack of criminal due process. Now I'm talking about their absolute retrograde versions of the laws of war. I mean, we all think of it as waking up on Christmas morning with personalized sweaters floating around and unlimited food, but it's a brutal place. It is an absolutely brutal place, and I think the Battle of Hogwarts shows that.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Questions?